What's up, everybody? Austin McDaniel here, also known as PI on Trail. And today I will be talking about my sleep system and what that looks like as a triple crown backpacker. I will mention that I'm not going to talk about the details or specifics about anything as far as weight, material, things like that. I think your best course of action is to just go directly to the websites and find that information directly from them. So, what I will talk about is, again, my base system. So my base setup that I use for temperatures down to 30 degrees. I'll talk a little bit about how I adjust it depending on the conditions and just kind of, my thoughts about why I use certain things. So to start, I'll talk about the most important piece of gear, and that is probably your sleeping bag or quilt. This is your last line of defense when you're trying to stay warm in the backcountry. And so you need to be very picky when choosing that piece of gear. For me, I started out as actually being a quilt user, and I even used a quilt on the Appalachian Trail in my years of backpacking before that. But on the Continental Divide Trail, I actually switched to a sleeping bag. And then I continued using it on the Pacific Crest Trail. And that is this same bag. This is the Summit Spark28. This is a down bag, and because it's a bag, it's probably a little heavier than the equivalent warmth quilt. But I find that having a bag over a quilt is a lot better for me. I do push the limits with my gear, and so I need to know that if I'm pushing the lowest comfort temperature of that gear, it will hold up. I find that while the recommended temperature of the bag and the quilt might be the same, I find that you can't push them as easily. So for me, the bag contains the heat better. So even though I might be the same temperature inside each, if I roll around in the bag, even though the insulation is compressed on my back, when I roll around, it will keep the heat that I've already built up. It will keep that heat in mostly. If I'm using a quilt and I turn, I'm pretty much guaranteed to lose a lot of that heat. So I have settled on a bag. I also find that having the extra weight and having the full hood that is attached to the bag is worth it as well. Again, it keeps the heat in better because it's fully encompassing and enclosing heat. I find that using liners and other layers also keep that warmth kind of exponentially better with a bag. So, talk a little bit about the Spark 28. Even though it is 28 in the name, that is their low level comfort. It is more like a 38-degree bag. I believe the website even listed as a comfortable 38, which is mostly summer. So being that that is a pretty warm temperature and a thru hike can last a lot of the year, I do supplement with other stuff. So my actual sleep system, my actual shelter system, I'm inside a bivvy, which is kind of like a liner for the outside. That bivvy adds another 5 degrees of relative warmth. Not much, but it adds up. The other thing that adds to warmth is a liner on the inside. So I do use a liner, specifically this cocoon silk liner. This does add about 4 ounces of weight, but it keeps my bag a lot more comfortable because of the silk material. It keeps my bag clean because I'm up against this and not my bag. And this is a lot easier to clean than my whole bag. So kind of like a bed sheet. And lastly, it does provide a little bit of extra warmth just by having another layer. It's another layer that helps keep that heat in, although it's probably only 3 to 5 degrees. But when you combine that with the bivvy, which is around the same, I can start pushing that 38 degrees and I can get down to 30 degrees, which is a pretty big difference when you're talking freezing compared to not freezing. So with the bag and this liner and then my bivvy that I sleep in as my shelter, I can push 30 degrees comfortably for me. Anything lower would start getting a little bit iffy. So another thing that kind of goes with my base sleep system is what I do about my head. So even though the bag has like a hood, I do like to have a little something else around my head. And so I do use an old beanie. It's also just the beanie I hike with if it's cold during the day. But this is an older one. It's a little bit thicker than normal and it is fleece material. And I find I really like having a beanie because it gives me a little bit of extra warmth for my head, but also I can pull it down over my eyes and kind of have like an eye mask. So if I want to sleep in, I'm able to do that a little bit easier. If I'm also sleeping with earbuds in, I find having the beanie is nice because it kind of helps contain those if one were to fall out while sleeping. So the beanie is a really nice addition. Even though I already have the hood from the bag, it's nice having the beanie for a little bit of extra warmth. So as far as other stuff for the head, I make a pillow. So this isn't an actual pillow. What this is a neck gaiter or a buff, and I have it wrapped around a stuff sack. So this is the stuff sack that I have all my extra stuff, clothing, sleeping bag, and I put everything in this. And so all my extra stuff that I'm not using goes in this bag. It's a stuff sack, so it keeps it contained. And then I take my neck gaiter, and like a pillowcase, I put everything inside of it, and you have a nice pillow. And you can kind of roll it up if you need a little bit more space for sleeping on your side, or if you're sleeping on your back, keep it nice and flat, and it provides good support and comfort for your head. So this is actually really nice, and it kind of justifies me carrying stuff sacks in my setup. So really good for a pillow. Really, really use that neck gaiter. All right, as far as the padding for the ground, I go very minimal in this category. And what I use is the Gossamer Gear 1/8" foam pad. So this thing is extremely lightweight, and that is pretty much the main reason I carry it. It is around like 2 to 4 ounces, probably closer to 2. And I do carry the full length, but even though I have the full length, it is just extremely lightweight. Because it is a foam pad, I value foam over inflatable pads because I like to be able to pack them on the outside of my pack. That way I can access them and use them during the day for a sit pad or a stretch pad, or if I want to take a nap. And because it's foam, it's extremely durable, which means as it gets scratched or used, or if something punctures it, it's going to still do its job. They're also a lot cheaper. And so just again, for budget, for accessibility, durability, I just prefer having a foam pad. This Gossamer Gear 1/8" foam pad in particular, though, being extremely minimal, does take time to get used to. And I think if you're trying to get used to this really quickly, your best case is just sleep on your floor at home. It might kind of sound like a little off idea, but if you know you're going to thru hike and you want to save a lot of weight, get used to sleeping on your back on the ground at your home. If you're sleeping on carpet, or put some towels, blankets down, start there, and then try to get more minimal. But practice at home, and that way, as you start going into the backcountry, you can get away with more minimal padding and save a lot of weight. So when you're hiking, which is what you're doing most of the time on a thru hike, you're going to be more comfortable. To push the limits of this foam pad, I can fold it in half and make it a 1/4 inch sleeping pad, and that also gives me a little bit of warmth. The problem is that the R value by itself is like 0.5, so there's really not much there. Even when I fold it in half, it's only like 1 R value. If I'm pushing the limits of my system and I'm going to 30 degrees, that is how I maximize that. I fold this in half, and I might have to put my feet on top of my backpack. So that would be my 30-degree base system. This is pretty much the exact system I use for most of the Pacific Crest Trail and for most of the Continental Divide Trail. However, for both of those hikes, I did late in the season have to swap out some stuff. So the most important thing, or the first thing I actually swapped out, is my foam pad. So because I do like this so much, I hate to swap it, but once it starts getting consistently cold, I need the warmth. So for the warmth, I switched to something like this, these kind of accordion style foam pads. The one I actually use is from Thermarest, the Z-Lite. This one right here, I think, is like the Nemo equivalent. But both pads are accordion. So I really like having the accordion. It just packs really nice, sits on the pack really well. And then they have this reflective material, and just being a thicker foam, it provides better warmth. I believe the R value is something like 2.0. And with those, I do go torso length to kind of save weight. Each panel is roughly 1 ounce. So having torso length for me was about 8 panels. So I was carrying about 8 ounces, which compared to most inflatable pads is about the same weight. Although it is torso length, I can just put my pad, or I can put my pack under my feet and keep that off the ground. But again, swapping this foam pad is something I kind of have to do later in the season once I need that warmth. The other thing I might do, if I find that I'm really going to be pushing into the 20s for temperature, I might have to get more warmth just for myself, and I can only deal with it so long. So instead of swapping my entire sleeping bag, what I tend to do is swap out the liners. So instead of using the silk liner, which is primarily for comfort and keeping my bag clean, I switch to a fleece liner. And so the space is about the same, but I find that the warmth is a lot better. So this is a Fleece Reactor by Summit, and they advertise that it's like 10 to 15 degrees of added warmth. I find that's probably not true, but it does get close to like 8 to 10 degrees. And so for the weight, I think the weight is around 8 to 9 ounces. The added weight might seem like a lot compared to just, I could swap my bag and go with a warmer bag. But for me, I don't like having two really expensive pieces of gear. I like knowing that I don't have to invest another, I don't have to invest in a 10-degree bag when I can keep just kind of layering with this one. And so you can find these liners for like $70. And so instead of having a whole nother bag I swap out to, I just add the liner. And because it's fleece, it's also extremely comfortable. I also have one of these anyway because during the summer, it's really nice to just carry a fleece liner. So again, I don't want to buy a whole new sleeping bag when I can just use something I already have. One of the other things I might swap to is actually in the opposite direction. Speaking of summer, when I was on the Appalachian Trail, I actually sent my quilt home and I bought just this cheap king camp blanket. So the quilt I had was like a 20-degree quilt and it was something like 20 ounces and I really liked it, but I just didn't need it. And so I swapped to this King Camp synthetic blanket and I found this on Amazon. So again, I'll try to have a link, but I found this on Amazon for super cheap. It was something like 20 bucks at the time. Maybe it's like 30 bucks now, but being that it's really cheap, I just didn't have to care about it. So when I was on something like the Appalachian Trail, sleeping in shelters, I didn't have to worry about this getting snagged on like wood or anything like that, or just the ground. And it kind of saved the wear and tear of my really nice stuff. So for, again, really cheap and being synthetic, not having to worry about it getting wet, this was extremely nice. Although the warmth is very limited, that's why I only use this in the summer. The warmth was really only good for like 50 degrees. Anything else I'd have to layer up. But this King Camp blanket, I would say I pushed it down to 40 degrees a couple nights and was fine. It wasn't the most comfortable, but it was fine. And so for a majority of the hike in the summer, just using something like this King Camp blanket is actually pretty clutch. And again, it can save the wear and tear on your nicer stuff. So I highly recommend looking into something like this, just a cheap synthetic blanket. It also packs in on itself, which is nice. And so if I didn't need it, then I could actually use it just as a pillow by itself. As far as other, other swap outs and stuff like that, I do have some of the more traditional inflatable pads, which if I'm really pushing it on a hike, that is my last resort, because I could have somebody send me one of those, although I do try to avoid that because of the reasons I mentioned about foam to inflatable. I like knowing that I don't have to worry about the pad deflating or getting punctured or anything like that. I also like to be able to quickly set up my pad, just throw it out there and be good to go. So I do avoid the inflatable pads if I can. So, and again, I try not to use different sleeping bags because I just don't want to have to invest in another really expensive bag when I can supplement the one I have. So that was just kind of a quick video over my sleep system, everything I use. I'm sure I missed out some information. So if you have any questions about anything, feel free to comment down below and I will do my best to answer. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more stuff like this, give it a subscribe. I plan to keep throwing stuff out like this. I plan to also do a how to thru hike series where I'm going to cover more miscellaneous stuff like filtering your water on trail, how to pick out a campsite, how to hitchhike, and all that stuff. So if you have any questions about just general how to thru hike stuff, throw that down below and I'll try to do a Q&A video in the future. So anyway, that's it guys. As always, have a good one and bye.